Hey y'all, how are you doing? I figured I'd share some of my experiences at Foot Locker and why I hated working there. Feel free to multitask while you're listening to this. You don't have to view this, there's nothing interesting going on the screen. I'm just going to be speaking to you casually as if we are just hanging out at Denny's at 2 in the morning, which is the best time to dine. So just think of this as me telling you this over an omelet and orange juice. So I'll start from the beginning. I applied to Foot Locker after I graduated from college. This was around 08, 09. This was the time period where we entered the greatest recession since the Great Depression and nobody was hiring. And so I was applying to a bunch of different jobs, and Foot Locker was one of the retail places that actually granted me an interview. And I felt pretty good about it just because the other places that I flunked the interview were Staples and T-Mobile. And I flunked them because I couldn't pretend to be excited, and that's something that's very difficult for me to do, is to act like I'm more excited than I actually am. I don't have enough energy to pull that off. So I went to an interview at T-Mobile, and the point where I knew that I lost the interview was when they asked me why I wanted to work at T-Mobile. And I couldn't come up with an enthusiastic answer. So I think that was kind of the turning point in that interview. But Foot Locker, for me, I felt a lot more confident because I'm actually into basketball shoes, and I've always been into basketball shoes. So I consider myself highly knowledgeable in that field. And so when I went into Foot Locker, I was actually able to be honest and tell the interviewer that when I go to a Foot Locker, because they asked me the same question, why do you want to work at Foot Locker? And I just told them that every time I go to a Foot Locker, I feel like a kid in a candy store. And this was true for the most part. I really enjoyed Foot Locker. I love going to it. I bought most of my shoes at Foot Locker, so I thought, why not work there? Why not work in a place that I enjoy shopping at? So I applied to the Foot Locker at Beverly Center. This is a House of Hoops location. House of Hoops is kind of a title that is granted to the flagship Foot Lockers in general. So there are a bunch of Foot Lockers in every city, but they're only going to give one House of Hoops title per something like 100 Foot Lockers. There are only a few that are designated with the House of Hoops certification, and this means that they're going to get shoes that other Foot Lockers don't get. Basketball shoes in particular, exclusives, special edition sneakers, and I wanted to work at this House of Hoops location at the Beverly Center in Beverly Hills, not only because of the House of Hoops designation and the fact that they got all these cool basketball shoes that other Foot Lockers weren't privy to, but it was also very vibey, and it was also the largest Foot Locker that I've ever been to. It just had an interior design that was different from all other Foot Lockers. It was very atmospheric, dimly lit, but then the shoes were spotlighted. So I just really liked being there. It had its own mood, its own ambience. So I applied there and I met up with the interviewer. Everything went well. And then, everything went well until he asked me, so we have an opening at the Santa Monica location. And this took me by surprise because I thought I was applying to the House of Hoops Foot Locker at Beverly Center. This is why we met at Beverly Center. But he was trying to assign me to the Santa Monica location, and had I been older and more mature and more worldly, then I would have refused. But because I was so young and naive and I didn't have much work experience, I eagerly accepted the job, even though the Santa Monica location was not a House of Hoops location. Generally, with Foot Lockers, they sell a lot of basketball shoes. They sell basketball shoes more than any other type of shoe. But with this Foot Locker in Santa Monica, it was the only Foot Locker in the district of Los Angeles that sold more running shoes than basketball shoes. So this was an anomaly. This was an outlier. And so they did not get a lot of basketball shoes as a result. And the Foot Locker company would send more running shoes to this Foot Locker. Mind you, this was around 2009. This was not a period when a lot of shoe companies were putting in a lot of R&D into running shoes, specifically Nike. Nike was the premier sneaker brand at Foot Locker, and so their running shoes were they just weren't that impressive at the time. Running shoes today are far more advanced, and there are some running shoes that are over $200 now from Nike. They're investing a lot more money into the running brand of of Nike. But back then, running shoes were very basic, and so I was not really into running shoes. The most expensive running shoe at the time was $140. It was an Air Max 2009, I believe, and it had an air bubble wrapping around the entire outsole, so it costed $140. And this is important because I will reference this in the future, why I'm telling you the price of running shoes, because it has to do with commission. You get 1.5% commission every time you sell shoes, and the reason why you want to sell basketball shoes more than running shoes, at least during that time period, is because basketball shoes generally cost a lot more than running shoes, and so you get more commission as an employee. And like I said, back in those days when I was working at Foot Locker in 2009, they did not have a lot of running shoes that costed more than $100, whereas they had plenty of basketball shoes that costed over $100, but then again, this location did not have a lot of basketball shoes. So the first thing I didn't like was, one, I'm not really into running shoes during 2009. Secondly, you're not getting as much commission because this is a running-centric location. And this was also the case because this Foot Locker was located on Third Street Promenade. And Third Street Promenade is a very popular outdoor shopping center. They have a lot of buskers on the streets performing, dancers, and kind of Cirque du Soleil type people who are performing on the streets, and an audience watching. And it's a place that attracts high volume of foot traffic. And it also tends to attract a lot of tourists from Europe. And apparently running shoes are more popular in Europe, so that's why this particular Santa Monica Foot Locker location caters to a demographic that's into running shoes. So here I was working here, and the fact that I'm working in Santa Monica in this Third Street Promenade leads to my second reason why I hated working there, is because we didn't have anywhere to park. If you've ever been to Third Street Promenade, parking is a mess. It's incredibly difficult to find parking, and you're going to have to pay at one of those parking lots that charges you money by every 15 minutes. Generally, they charge you something like $3 per every 15 minutes, and then parking all day is like $30. So I didn't want to park in one of these facilities because it's not like we got a parking pass as Foot Locker employees. We were on our own when it came to looking for parking. And the manager, when I met him, made it seem like it was easy to find parking. He said, well, like 2 or 3 blocks away, you could find parking. And this was not the case at all because in Los Angeles, public parking, street parking is extremely competitive. And because it's so competitive, there are also residential areas that forbid you from parking because they're next to commercial areas and the people living in their residences don't want people to crowd up their parking, their neighborhoods. So they put up signs that say that you can't park there, otherwise you're going to be issued a ticket. And so to avoid this, you need to travel about 10 blocks away from commercial areas, like a Third Street Promenade. And so I was parking 10, 11 blocks away, and I would always make sure that I would memorize the address, the street signs, because I feared that I'd forget where I parked because I was parking so far away. And every day I would park in a different street. This was a challenge for me. Not only was I reporting in the morning because I was opening the store, I got the morning shift, so I had to wake up really early, but I also had to wake up even earlier because I had to accommodate for the walking time from my car to the shop, not to mention also looking for parking and making sure I was not parking in an area on a side that had street cleaning that day or forbid you from parking. And so parking was incredibly difficult. And the other thing that I did not like about working here was that the manager was very strict. So I was told what to wear by the person who interviewed me, just black pants. And so I went out to a JCPenney and purchased a $50 pair of black khakis. But then when I showed up, the manager said that he didn't like the cotton fiber of my pants, and he suggested that I get a nylon blend, where it kind of was sleeker, I guess. It was kind of shinier, and it looked a little bit more polished, and it attracted less lint and dust. And I thought this was kind of a little bit more strict than any of the other Foot Lockers because I actually purchased the pants that I had because I went to the Foot Locker in Glendale Galleria and saw what the employees there were wearing, and they were wearing black khakis. And so I had to go to JCPenney again and purchase $50 worth of pants again. So this was $100 that I had spent just on the uniform because they don't issue you pants. They just issue you the referee top, the official Foot Locker uniform, which is the vertical stripes that resemble an NFL referee. So I didn't like that. And then another reason that I didn't like it was because one day I showed up to work. This was the morning, and I had my shirt untucked from my pants. And this was before I had checked in. I had not clocked in yet. And the manager showed up and he told me that I should always have it tucked in. And I said, even when I'm not clocked in? And he said, as long as you have the uniform on, you should always have it tucked in. And I asked him why. And he said it's because I'm representing the Foot Locker brand whenever I put on my referee shirt. And as long as I'm representing the brand, I want to represent it in the best light possible. And he talked about how people have a very high perception of Foot Locker, and they associate it and expect the highest standard from the Foot Locker brand. And so I should keep my shirt tucked in because keeping it untucked portrays kind of a sloppy image that is adverse to what Foot Locker stands for. And so I found this also kind of a little over the top because, again, I'm not clocked in, and secondly, I've seen so many Foot Locker employees at shopping malls during their lunch break with their shirt untucked. You could tell that they were on their lunch break because they'd be holding food in their hands and they'd be taking an escalator. I've seen this countless times because I used to go to the mall every day when I was a kid. And so I didn't think there was anything to it. But yeah, he told me I should always keep my shirt untucked to give off the most professional vibe. And then I was working there, and so this Foot Locker location, as opposed to the House of Hoops location at the Beverly Center, was different because this was the smallest Foot Locker I'd ever worked at. And it was basically a square box. It was a small space. It was like a room. As soon as you enter it, you could see everything on the left, everything on the right. It's a very basic setup that they just rented out. They really didn't do anything to make it look special or distinguished as a Foot Locker store. This looked no different than really any of the other cookie cutter stores and layouts of all the shops that are lined up at the Third Street Promenade, including the Adidas, the Reebok, Skechers. They had so many shoe companies lining the Third Street Promenade. Nothing at this Foot Locker set itself apart really from any of the other brands, whereas the House of Hoops at the Beverly Center, it had its own specific look to it, and it was nice, and you could actually walk around without getting bored as easily because it's a big store, it's expansive. When you enter it, you can't see the entire store by just looking left and right. You actually have to walk around and explore the shop, whereas this Santa Monica location was just white lighting, white walls, very basic, simple, and as soon as you got in, you could see what the store was. It was a small room. And so I couldn't really walk around it much, and I wanted to walk around because since it's a small store and you have to be on your feet all day, which is another reason why I didn't like working there, it's because it's better to be walking around, at least kind of being mobile, rather than just standing in one spot all day. And so I wanted to kind of roam around, but there was nowhere to roam. And so I just be going around in circles in an 8 feet diameter circle, just going in around and around, circumambulating mindlessly because there was nowhere to walk, and standing on my feet hurt my joints, my back, my soles, and I just wanted to kind of get the blood flowing. And we didn't have many customers, especially during the morning shift. This was not a time when people are out shopping because we opened at 8 in the morning. And so we would get 1-2 customers per hour. And by the time we kind of began picking up traffic, I was clocking out. So it was very boring for me because, again, no customers. And you really didn't have much to do other than stand around. And so yeah, I didn't like that. And once we had a customer come in and he was trying shoes on, so since we have benches, I figured I would just sit down beside him. And by sitting down beside the customer who was trying on shoes, I thought I'd be accomplishing two goals. I'd be killing two birds with one stone. One, I would be resting my joints, my knees, just changing up my posture because I was really uncomfortable standing on my feet all day. And secondly, I thought I was leveling with the customer. I was kind of just being eye to eye with the customer by dropping down with the customer and sitting next to the customer. I thought if anything, it would give off a friendly impression to the customer by sitting next to the customer, as opposed to hovering over the customer and looking down on the customer. But afterward, the manager came up to me and said I should always be standing because it's unprofessional to ever sit down. And he kind of went off on the spiel about how everybody expects only the highest behavior from a Foot Locker representative. Once the manager walked me outside and he started sharing his life story to me. And at the time, I didn't think going outside was not something that he ever did. So when he did tell me, hey, let's go outside and have a talk, I didn't know what to expect. Little did I know that he would be talking for over an hour. And this would have been fine if we were sitting down inside a cool place. But he took me outside, 90-degree weather in Los Angeles. The sun is beaming, and he started telling me his life story. And I was actually standing opposite the sun, so the sun was actually just blaring down on me and bleaching out my eyes. My eyes were dry to begin with because coming out of college, I was wired nocturnally, and so I was sleeping at 4 in the morning. Suddenly, I'm waking up at 5 in the morning, and I felt really jet lagged, and I could hardly keep my eyes open. Compound that with now the sun just piercing my eyes, and he had his back turned to the sun, and now I would probably be able to speak up for myself because I'm older, I'm a little bit more jaded, and I'm not as tentative and timid as I used to be. So I would ask the manager, could we resituate ourselves? But at the time, I was not like that. I was very naive and afraid of the world, and I didn't want to rub people the wrong way. I was extremely non-confrontational. I still am. But yeah, I didn't know that he would go on for over an hour and keep talking. I thought it would end any moment, but it kept going on. 15 minutes into it, I knew that I was probably in it for the long haul, but I kept hoping that it would end soon. He talked about how he was a small town boy from Pittsburgh and how he was living the dream now, all thanks to Foot Locker. And so he was just giving me this inspirational speech of how if I work for Foot Locker, then Foot Locker will take care of you. And so he got scouted to the California location, Santa Monica, because he was doing so well in Pittsburgh, and so he was brought here to kind of shape it up. And yeah, he seemed to be a company man, loyalist, and he honestly was the most patriotic manager that I'd ever worked for in any retail company because he was so jingoistic. He was so loyal to the brand that it was kind of a little too much for me because as much as I loved Foot Locker, he seemed to have a higher impression of it than normal. And in one way, I understand what he's doing. I understand the psychology of it because he kept talking about the importance of being a professional representative and the amount of expectation that customers place on you, by telling me to have a strict dress code and telling me to stand all day on my feet. And he was kind of patronizing in a lot of ways, but every time he told me this and kind of talked about how customers expect only the utmost from a Foot Locker worker, to me, it seemed a little excessive, and there reaches a point where it becomes borderline delusional, and it didn't seem like it matched the reality of how people really perceive Foot Locker employees. As someone who loved Foot Locker and went shopping at Foot Locker all the time prior to getting the job, I never looked at a Foot Locker employee with their shirts untucked during break time and thought anything of it other than they're on their break. I never thought that a Foot Locker employee should be standing all day, otherwise they're being sloppy. I've never walked out of a store because somebody was sitting. So if I'm interested in a shoe, I'm going to purchase it no matter what. But I never thought that working at Foot Locker was this exclusive, privileged institution, like he was saying it. He was making it seem like it was so prestigious and like we were working for the Avengers or something. It just didn't seem to match reality. And so that kind of got old really fast. I know what the manager was trying to do. I know that he was trying to instill this sense of importance in me, like I matter as a Foot Locker employee. But I was getting paid $9 an hour, which was only $1 more than minimum wage at the time, as an assistant manager. And I wondered if I was just the person who was kind of shortchanging myself, because even though I love working at Foot Locker, I just didn't feel that important as the manager was making it out to seem. It seemed like he was talking it up, so I actually asked a friend, I confided in him, told him what was going on, and he said, "It's fucking Foot Locker. You're working at fucking Foot Locker." And so it confirmed to me that I was being gaslit by the manager. And then the other thing was, now the employees, they were very courteous. I got along with all of them. I didn't have any drama, any problems with any of them. At the same time, none of them were interested in shoes. So it was so ironic because I was the new guy and I actually ended up quitting just weeks into the job, and I was talking to these employees who had been there for years. These people were there for years and they were not really into shoes. So it was very ironic that the people who lasted for years were not really into shoes. You couldn't really talk to them about shoes. They didn't care that much. They were just working at Foot Locker as if anybody would be working at a place like Staples. Office supplies are essential. We all need a pen and paper and printer ink cartridge, but it's not something that we get too excited about. And so they were just there. Plus, you need a job to pay the bills. And so it was a very prosaic atmosphere. There was no goofing around. Nobody was joking around. And maybe it was because this was the morning shift and it was because the manager was there. I'm assuming the manager was there during the mornings and he clocked out and left for the night, and maybe it would lighten up the mood. But the morale there, the spirit there was just flatlined when I was there. There was no talking or anything among us outside of what we were supposed to do at work. And so it was not fun at all. I didn't have any customers. And when I did, most of the times they were actually asking for Converse All-Stars. They're called Chucks, which is short for Chuck Taylors, and they're these classic Converse shoes that basketball players used to wear in the 60s. And so they're very old shoes, classics, but they're also very cheap, so you don't get a lot of commission. And they're also the hardest to find. So you actually had to work hardest whenever you got a Converse Chuck request, because we had an entire shelf dedicated to Converse All-Stars, but we didn't have the size for any of them. We only had the most obscure sizes, so anytime somebody asked me for the shoe, I knew that I would be looking for it in vain, struggling for 15 minutes to locate the shoe size, because when you see Foot Locker commercials, you see the storage area and it looks very impressive. And there are shelves that are stacked up high and everything seems very organized. But then at this Foot Locker store, they didn't accommodate for the fact that it was a Foot Locker. So you go in to the back and it's just a hall leading to a couple rooms, 2 or 3 small office type rooms. And that hallway that is very narrow was where we stored all the shoes. And there was just like a basic steel shelf lining the walls, and we would just stack the boxes of shoes there, and it was very jumbled and disorderly. Nothing was in alphabetical order. The sizes were not in numerical order. Everything was out of place, but apparently if you keep working there, then at some point you're going to gain some kind of intuitive feel for it, because the employees who had been there for years would be able to locate shoes a lot easier than I did. So perhaps there is a method to the madness, but for me, being new, all the way up to the very end, I struggled tremendously looking for the shoes. And there was actually a guy that only worked in the back of the house, but he was only there for about the first 2 hours every morning. He never went to the front. He was not a salesperson. He was just in the back of the house, and he was just stocking up every morning if we would get delivery or if they were shipping out shoes that didn't sell. And while he was there, if I had a customer come in and ask me for a specific shoe, I would ask him for help, because he was very friendly and he was just happy to interact with someone, because he was all the way in the back, isolated, and so he was open to human communication. Any kind of interaction was great for him, and I was grateful for it because it worked out for me too, since I could never find the shoes that customers were asking for. But after the 2 hours was up, I was on my own, and I didn't want to ask any of the other employees because they were a lot more annoyed with me asking for them to do my job for me. And so I wanted to get better and be on my own and be independent and be able to look for shoes by myself. But again, it just never came to fruition. Up to the very last day, I struggled mightily. And so we'd get these Converse All-Star requests. I'd go back out. The most requested colors were black and red. They were the most popular. We would never have them in any size. So I'd go into the back, look for it, and come out empty-handed. And then they'd say, well, what about the navy blue one? What about the army green one? What about the pink one? And it would just go on. And you could spend over half an hour looking for shoes that we don't have, just because it was not organized. I wish there was like a computer pad where you could just punch in the shoe and size to know if we even have it in the back or not. But we didn't. It would have been a lot more efficient. And then the other times we would get running shoes. Rarely I would actually get a request for the Air Max shoes that costed $140 that I mentioned earlier. The $140 Air Max shoes with the 360-degree air bubble encapsulating the outsole. I would get excited at the prospect of getting 1.5% commission, which would amount to $150. So I'd go to the bag and I'd look for it. I'd finally find it, and as I'm coming out, I see the manager waiting for me at the door. And he would take the box from me and say, "I'll take it from here. Why don't you go help another customer who just walked through the door? Why don't you help that person? Why don't you ask that person what they want?" Even though they didn't even need help, he would say, "Why don't you practice that sales pitch that I taught you earlier on that customer over there standing there?" And so he would take the shoe and he would essentially take my commission along with it, which was very odd, the timing of it, because he would only do this when I got an expensive shoe. But he would never do this when I got a Converse All-Star request. Not only was I skeptical of his sort of pledge of allegiance to Foot Locker, but now he was stealing my commission, and so I didn't appreciate it at all. And then the last straw that broke the camel's back was I had this one customer who comes and asks me for a pair of running shoes, and it costed like $70. I looked for the size and I brought it out. And so he put it on, he walked around with it, and he hopped up and down, kind of jogged, checked himself out in the mirror. He did this for a considerable stretch of time. After he was finished, he asked me, could I try out another color? And so I brought him another color, and he put those on too. He repeated the same dance, and then he asked me for a third color. And so I brought him out the third color, and he had now tried on 3 shoes that were the same shoes, just in different color. And I spent almost an hour with him, and then he asked me for a 4th color. Unfortunately, we didn't have a 4th color. He was asking for a mystery color that I'd never seen before, and I knew the Foot Locker catalog front to back at the time. I was very familiar with the catalog. I was also familiar with exclusives that other stores received. I knew that for this particular model of running shoe, they only had 3 colors. He was asking for a color that I'd never heard of, and so I was pretty confident that color didn't exist. So I was trying to tell him that that color doesn't exist, but he kept refuting it and insisting that he had seen it at a different location. And so at that point, if the customer pushes back, then you just let the customer have it. And I politely suggested that he should probably purchase it from the other location that he had seen it. I know this because I used to work at Hollywood Video, and we always had customers coming up to us and asking for movies that were still playing in theaters. And you would tell them that they don't even have a release date for that movie yet because it just came out in the theaters, and the customers would argue that they had seen it at Blockbuster. And so you can't say, no, it's not out yet, because then you're essentially telling the customer that they're liars. And customers don't like it very much when you accuse them of lying. I honestly didn't have it in me to work another day. I was on my last ropes, and I was ready to give my 2 weeks. I show up, and for the first time, the manager's not there. And so I told the assistant manager, who was actually very laid back, and I liked him because he was so much more laid back. He wasn't as uptight. And so I told him this, and he did not have any hostile knee-jerk reaction. He just took it in, and he asked me why I was quitting. He had some inquiries, but they weren't confrontational. And I told him why, which was not completely true. It was partial. And the reason was I told him that the commute was too long for me because Santa Monica is 3-4 times the commute as the location that I'd originally interviewed for, which was the House of Hoops in Beverly Center. So I said, this location is just too far from me, and so I'd like to work closer, nearby. And so he understood, and then I go home and I get this phone call, and this phone call ended up lasting over an hour. It was a very long phone call, and it made me really anxious because the manager was putting the heat on me. He was applying a lot of pressure for me to keep working there. And he was just reiterating what he was telling me the whole time. And he kept telling me to reevaluate it, rethink my decision. And there was nothing for me to reconsider. I was 100% sure that I was not compatible with this job. But then he kept saying that he believed that this was a premature decision. Do I want to think it over for a little bit longer, dwell on it a little longer, sleep on it, and call him back tomorrow? I didn't want to have this talk all over again. I just wanted it to be over with. I dreaded thinking about this for another night, let alone talking to him again. And I tried to tell him in the most non-confrontational way possible that it was not that I didn't like working there. I told him that I just did not like the commute. The commute was too long for me. So he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, I am issuing my 2 weeks. And he said, okay, well, and I said, and he told me that they were not short-staffed and they didn't really need me, so that I could quit just in that instant, and this could be my last day if I wanted it to be. And so when he gave me this offer, I took it without hesitation. But then he said, it was very weird because after he put that out there, he said, well, if you don't work here for 2 weeks, if you don't give in your 2 weeks and ride out the 2 weeks, then what's going to happen is that I'm going to be banned from ever working at Foot Locker again across the nation. If I quit and not give my 2 weeks, then I'm not going to be able to apply ever again. And I will never be able to work for the Foot Locker company again. And I said, well, if you need me, because I wanted to be ethical and professional, I said, if you need me, I don't want to just up and leave you hanging. I will work the 2 weeks if you're short-staffed. And he said, we're not short-staffed, but if you want to work for Foot Locker again, I highly insist that you stay around for 2 more weeks. I just didn't see the point in working for another 2 weeks. And so I said, well, you're saying that you're not short-staffed, so I don't see the purpose of doing that. And he said, but then you're not going to be able to apply again and work for Foot Locker again. And I said, I don't think you're going to be hiring me again anyway, after the way this played out. And we just kept going back and forth. And the other thing is, he also said that he regretted giving me the morning shift because he said that the morning shifts are the worst shifts. You don't have a lot of customers, so you don't get a lot of commission, and you also have to wake up really early. And so this was the only time where he was actually being a little bit transparent with me, which I appreciated, but it was kind of too little too late. And then we finally hung up, and I was just glad to put this behind me. I got my check a month later, and it came out to something like $167, which was unbelievable because I'd been there for 2 or 3 weeks. In the end, I ended up losing more money because I spent $100 on pants and also accounting for the gas that I wasted being stuck in traffic to and fro. It took me an hour to get to the store and an hour to get back on average. And On top of that, I also had to pay for parking more than one occasion. It might have been 3 times because I couldn't find parking, so I would park in those parking structures that charge $30 to park all day. And so in the end, I actually ended up losing more money than I made working at Foot Locker. Anyway, let me know if you have any retail experiences that are relatable. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.